Well, welcome to the Security Weekly News wrap-up show for the week of 25 September 2022. We've got Optimus Prime, hard drives, Exchange, Witchetty, TLP, DOD, EIEIO, and all the show wrap-up. Stick around.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
Right now, everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, and the cyber criminals are hiding in the conversation. Cyber criminals use social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on your company, your employees, and your customers. Spear phishing is just one of the 13 types of email threats. Barracuda has identified 13 types and shows you how you can protect your company, your customers, and your reputation. Find out about the 13 email threat types and Barracuda email protection by going and getting your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. All right, I'm Doug White, and this is the Security Weekly News Wrap-Up Show, episode 243. This week on Application Security Weekly number 213, John, Tyler, and Mike had Janet Worthington, a senior analyst for security at Forrester Research, on the show. And Janet was on to talk about the state of education in application security. And the whole thing was basically about how to secure apps while you're building them. So it was about how do you train people up so that they can actually build secure apps. And I mean, again, this is sort of a perennial topic that keeps coming up, and it probably will. It's been coming up as long as I've been around, and it'll probably keep coming around until I'm dead. But it is an issue, and it's definitely worth, if you're doing app development, to check out. In the second segment, the AppSec News. On Business Security Weekly number 278, Matt, Jason, and Tyler had on our friend Fleming Shih, who is the CTO of Barracuda Networks. Fleming was on to talk about the ransomware attack patterns report that Barracuda puts out now. They put that out every year. I think it was the fourth annual report that they put out. They were talking about three different examples in that report that were related to small business. So an interesting report to check out if you haven't seen that, or it's a nice way to get introduced to it. In the second segment, the leadership and communications news. On Enterprise Security Weekly 290, Adrian, Tyler, Shields, and Katie did not put up what that first segment was about by the time I wrote this. So it just, I don't know. In the first segment. In the second segment, James Norrie, the CEO at CyberConnect Inc., was on, and James was on talking about educating employees with a personalized patented human defense platform. So this is a pretty interesting idea, I guess. But apparently, they're according to their numbers, it decreased phishing to around a 2% success rate. So I would say that's pretty good. I mean, based on that, people have been doing phishing since I started doing phishing back in like the 80s. Phishing has always worked, and I call it infinite series because there's just keep trying until you find that one person who falls for it. So, but apparently they have a new approach. In the third segment, they had Enterprise Security News. Yeah. The first, I was just told by the magic voice in the sky that the first segment was the state of the market for venture capital. So if you're interested, you definitely check that out. They have a lot of good insight there. They had not posted that when I wrote my notes, so sorry. On Security Weekly News number 242, Jason was talking about social media companies really targeting Chinese and some Russian interference in the U.S. midterm election. So this has been going on now since way back, it may have been going on since the 1950s, but the 2016 election and other elections around that time, and the 2020 election, were very heavily targeted by Chinese and Russian groups attempting to spread misinformation via social media in all directions. So it's not one party or the other. It was just almost like chaos. Jason was talking about that. On Pulse Security Weekly number 757, Ev Konsevoy, the co-founder and CEO at Teleport, was on the show. And that segment was mostly about how do we get rid of secrets and instead use access control based on physical properties of humans. and machines. So actually, sort of a Kerberized world and on the machine side, but also talking about how can we use more biometrics and things instead of passwords, because we all know that those fail pretty readily. In the second segment, of course, the cybersecurity news. The threat of the week for me was going to be lack of data controls. And so it's kind of old school, but that's sort of sad, right? Because this is something we've been talking about. I remember the first time I really got involved in this way back when I got involved in this sort of academic slap fight with, and I'm going to put this in air quotes, so if you're just listening, I'm doing air quotes every time I say a grad student. It's well known that sometimes professors, not me of course, use their grad students to promote their agendas. And so I got in this academic slap fight with a grad student of a professor about drive wiping, because the professor, and I'm not even going to name this person's name anymore, but I'm sure you'll know who it is. The professor had stated that data could be recovered from old hard drives with an electron microscope, and basically showed in a very academic way that you could sometimes figure out a bit on a hard drive, on an old MFM type hard drives, with an electron microscope by seeing the area around where the bit was physically on the drive. And I'm not arguing that this is not true, because they did demonstrate that you could do this. Now, my problem with this was some of that started driving people to these ridiculous regimens that they needed to do in order to wipe a hard drive. And I was auditing companies, and we were advocating for wiping hard drives before they were disposed of, which makes an awful lot of sense to me. But I had written a paper and published it that argued that a one-pass wipe, and you can fight about this in Discord in the comments if you want, or you can take me on, and it's fine. And I'll give you some qualifiers for this. But I was arguing that a one-pass wipe was probably sufficient for qualifier, non-classified data that was not secrets, it was not launch codes, it was not stuff like that, because what we did in our paper was we actually wiped a bunch of drives forensically, just one pass. All we set every single bit on the drive from bit 0 to bit FFF, however many it was, to 0. And my argument was, well, if all the bits are 0, well, there's nothing there. So now this got the grad student, in air quotes, incensed, since I had ignored the critical work by Professor X. Now, I did not ignore the critical work by Professor X. I had read the paper. I just didn't think it was germane to what I was doing, because my goal was creating a peer-reviewed, published article that corporations could cite when they were doing Sarbanes, HIPAA, and other types of auditing for drive wiping, because I wanted to find a way to reduce the amount of time that my client had to spend actually wiping drives to be in compliance, because everyone was requiring a DOD wipe. So they kept recommending DOD wipes. And DOD wipes, it takes a long time, because it's many passes. And it's like 7 passes of zeros, 7 passes of ones, and then 7 passes of random bits, and all of that. And that theoretically would get around this electron microscope thing, which was really bothering me a lot, because I was not totally convinced that in most corporate situations that there were people hanging around with electron microscopes out back ready to grab drives at random and then use the electron microscope to somehow find this information out. And so I was just saying that for non-classified data, for just general use stuff, desktops and laptops or whatever, wiping a single pass of zeros, and I did it. So I wiped a bunch of drives. I used both methods. I used DOD wipes and I used forensics wipes, and I went and examined all the drives with forensics tools. And guess what? I didn't find anything. The forensics tools did not recover any. Now, I didn't have an electron microscope. I don't have the budget for that. But this grad student, in air quotes, was rabid about this, and they just kept on about it and kept on about it and kept on about it and saying it shouldn't be published and blah, 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 blah. Well, so eventually, none other than Craig Wright, the Craig Wright, decided that he was going to get involved in this. Now, he had a lot of money, apparently, and he bought an electron microscope. Literally went and bought one, and he found out that yes, it was indeed true that even on more modern hard drives that occasionally you could find a bit, but that when you needed to recover bytes, because a bit doesn't do much for you. You need 8 bits to even get one character. And that when you needed to recover bytes in a sequence, and you actually did the statistics on the likelihood of this based on the professor's work, that there's a real difference in recovering a bit, recovering a byte, and recovering, say, a credit card number, which might be a whole bunch of bytes in a row. Because now you got to recover every single bit, to get that. And, and that in that end, what Craig showed in that paper was that if you just flipped a coin on each bit, it was just about the same likelihood that you would actually be able to get any data back as was in this old electron microscope thing from the professor. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're protecting serious data, what we recommended was not this, was not the one-pass wipe. It was not even a DOD wipe. It was that you very likely should drill out the platters, shred them, incinerate them, and salt the earth with their remains so nothing will ever grow again. But for garden variety, drives that were being recovered on a daily basis from people's offices, from laptops, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, my method worked just fine. It was wiped. Maybe if the Chinese government's after your data, then yeah, I would not be selling those drives at all. I don't even know what all possibilities might be out there with electron microscope. But I used to buy tons of drives and tons of phones off eBay. I have hundreds of them at my house. And I would check them to see if they'd been wiped. And it was about 20% of them that had not been wiped, and they had data on them. And that's very, very bad. So you need to wipe these drives. So in this paper or this article that I attached this rant was that Morgan Stanley dumped all these drives at auction, and they weren't wiped at all. They hired some third party to allegedly decommission the drives and then sent them 53 RAID arrays with over 1,000 hard drives in there. And they had 8,000 data tapes and so forth. But the third party they sold them to didn't even wipe them. They sold them to another third party who was supposed to wipe them. They didn't wipe them either. And basically they dumped them on an auction site. And eventually people bought them. And oops. So the SEC fined them $35 million because I presume this is a violation of either Sarbanes-Oxley or Gramm-Leach-Bliley for disclosing all this data. And I understand 35 million is probably the daily martini budget at Morgan Stanley, but but we all have data. Some of us have massive data stores larger than all the documentation in human history. So we really need to make sure that you have a method that this data will be wiped that can be actually done. Because one of the studies we did early on DOD wipes with this client, and this was a long time ago, was that it was going to take, well, basically, if they had to DOD wipe every drive that they got in to dispose of every year, it was just unbelievable how much time that was. It was crazy. And so we had to come up with a better way to do that. So you got to be careful when you start failing to wipe drives or your recycling model is not tested, because then you end up with something like Barone Disposal picking up the drives to be wiped, and instead of wiping them, they just take them out and dump in a vacant lot somewhere like on The Sopranos. So, I would advocate that you should classify your data by type. And then you have to determine what wiping technique and or destruction technique was the most appropriate for that particular type of data. Because if you have a financial trader and they've got a hard drive that's covered in this stuff, or it's your big RAID assembly, you want to be sure it's wiped. But on the other hand, some stuff maybe not a big deal. And you may even need to just destroy the device if it's sensitive enough. But guess what? Wiping drives is very slow. That means money. And pretty soon that going to get cut. They're not going to do it. And so when I used to audit, we tested these processes all the time every year, and we found that they just didn't do it, even if they had a policy in place, because they couldn't keep up. They allocate one poor intern to this. They got 100 drives a day coming in from their 35,000 employees where they get new machines or whatever, and the one little intern person was sitting down in an office piled high with hard drives, and they couldn't keep up. And eventually they didn't have enough room for the drives that were coming back in, so they eventually just started scrapping them through a third party, and they didn't test it, so who knows what was happening. But anyway, it could be that it's something critical that you're releasing, so it is definitely time for you to review your disposal approaches. If you're auctioning off engineering laptops on eBay, that could be bad. So wipe those drives consistently, have a good approach, test it. And you can always look for my old paper, but before you end up breaching something that you shouldn't breach, and like I say, I understand all the calculations about the cost of the potential loss, may be lower than the cost of just wiping the drive. So if the SEC starts adding zeros to those fines, it could get serious, and then you may have to take it seriously. I don't know if that $35 million fine is the equivalent of me getting a parking ticket for $35 or if it actually hurts at Morgan Stanley. I mean, think about it. Ford calculated the cost of recalling those Pintos, the vehicle, and that they realized that the recall was going to cost more than their estimated payouts for all the victims of the explosions. Yeah, it's a famous business case. So if it costs more than $35 million, that's, to wipe the drives, then don't expect them to stop dumping the drives in a vacant lot somewhere. I mean, I know it's really cynical for a Friday in September, but I audited large company securities. I've seen it. And now the news. Sorry, I had to go on about that. I couldn't resist this first story as well because it's another story about controls auditing. And again, I saw this so many times. In this particular story, an IT systems admin got laid off in Hawaii at a high-profile financial. So when this person was laid off, which is never a good time, right? I mean, when you need to have a policy procedure for these, what they call separations. I put that in air quotes too, but that's what they called it. They didn't want to say fired or laid off or, whatever. They call it separations. It's a warm, fuzzy, friendly term. But anyway, this person, Casey Umetsu, used his credentials to access the config settings on the website after being laid off and made numerous changes, including misdirecting the web and email traffic to outside computers, which basically shut the whole company down and released all sorts of information. This was according to the United States Justice Department. He then proceeded to lock the IT team out from their website admin panel, so they couldn't even make these changes back. Now, his argument was he was trying to get them to hire him back by demonstrating how poor their security was. I was like, well, I don't know if this is the right approach. But he's going to be sentenced in January and had pled guilty to this and faced up to 10 years in prison and $250,000 in fine. So look, folks, you have to have a separation policy. And guess who the most dangerous people in the world are? IT and security administrators. When you dismiss these people, well, just like when they dismissed this guy at a company, and I saw this happen once. The guy just basically said, screw you guys, I'm going home. But then they let him walk. And he went down in the server room, used his code to get in through the crypto lock, and proceeded to cut all of their Cat 5 cables off right at the switch, where it was plugged into the NIC. And it was a big mess. That was why I got involved. They were like, can you help us reconstruct this? Because we have no idea where all these cables go. And it was like, oh, my God. But anyway, ensure you got this under control. Right around any time you're doing separations, you may want to look for new accounts that have been created, because we've seen that where an IT administrator knew they were going to be fired. There was rumors of firing. They went in and created new accounts for themselves so they could get back in even if their account was shut off, and on and on and on. And like I said, if your employees think stuff's about to happen, they may take preemptive action. So beware of this. Mandiant, which is now a division of Google or Alphabet or whatever. I don't know how that works. I don't know if you have to say it's a division of Alphabet or Google, or I think Google's a division of Alphabet and Facebook's a division of Meta, and on and on. But anyway, whatever they're called, reported that a threat actor suspected to have ties with China used a malicious vSphere installation bundle, which is called a VIB, to deliver virtual PITA and virtual Pi. Pi. And I like pitas too. A pie and a okay. Anyway, sorry. It's about getting close. Lunchtime's coming up in a while. The VIB is a package which allows for the creation and maintenance of the ESXi, which is the bare metal hypervisor in VMware. And this threat actor, who's named UNC3886, which is not a cool name at all. Call me Snake Plissken. But anyway, good old UNC3886 modified the XML descriptor in this package that had malware in it so that when people checked it, it did not show community, but it rather said partner, which meant that theoretically, you at least assume that VMware has somehow validated this, but in reality, it was just an XML field. Virtual PITA, if you're not familiar with it, is a 64-bit passive backdoor that sets up a listing daemon on your machine. And Virtual Pi is a Python-based IPv6 daemon that actually supports arbitrary command line execution, file transfer, and reverse shells. They found that on those systems that had been compromised because somebody downloaded this VIB package and installed it, that the Windows virtual machines on those infected ESXi servers were infected with something called Virtual Gate, which is a memory-only dropper that downloads and deobfuscates another DLL payload on the virtual machine. Yow. I mean, to me, it was a very interesting story because, this is one of those things where, all of a sudden somebody's going through the ESXi layer on this thing to get to virtual machines. But the moral here is that you really need to have a good process for getting these VBI packages or any other packages and ensure that they are what you think they are. So just like we talk about APIs all the time in the same way. Microsoft confirmed that 2 recently reported 0 days in Exchange Server, and that included Exchange Server 2013, 2016, and 2019, were being exploited in the wild. The first one is a server-side request forgery, and the second allows remote code execution when PowerShell can be accessed by the attacker. So put those two things together, right? Microsoft assured people that if you are an Exchange Online customer, so if you're running your Exchange servers in their cloud, that they had mitigated this and protected and you didn't need to do anything. But that if you were managing your own servers, that they did have mitigations, but they were not. They was not patched, and there were no mitigations in place automatically. GTSC, who's a Vietnamese cybersecurity firm, reported this to Microsoft originally. They waited a while until mitigations could be revealed, and then they reported this lately, and now said that the 0 days are being chained together to deploy Chinese chopper web shells, which is a pretty common one. And this can allow, of course, lateral movement, data theft, and so forth. Microsoft said that if you are an on-prem customer, you should review and apply the URL rewrite instructions and block exposed remote PowerShell ports, which sounds like a good idea anyway. But the whole mitigation, if you want all the steps and everything, is in the article I attached. So if you are running Exchange Server on premises, you may want to check that out. Since we're on Microsoft anyway, excuse me, the Witchetty hacking group, which does have a cool name, by the way, is a group believed to have close ties to Chinese actor APT-10 called Cicada. So lots of cool names here. Sounds like a comic book. But Cicada and Witchetty are likely a part of the TA-410 operatives, which is a Chinese nation-state kind of group. They have previously attacked U.S. energy providers. Well, they were apparently able to hide backdoor malware in a Windows logo, which doesn't really surprise me. I mean that's a pretty straightforward kind of thing to do, I would think. But apparently, they used an XOR encrypted backdoor in an old Windows logo bitmap file using steganography. And steganography, if you don't know what it is basically a technique where you take bits, especially in image files, but you can actually do it with any kind of file. You take bits in there that aren't really being used because there's lots of little flag bits and stuff, and you just have to have a consistent approach. And they basically write bits to those and then can read them back. And this allows you to store other data in a picture. You can put a picture in a picture or other file data or secret messages or whatever. Always a very popular topic in forensics classes. The file then appears pretty harmless. It's a Windows logo bitmap, and they can put this, so they push this logo out onto a public, trusted cloud service, which means that when you're looking for detection of these things, you may not actually notice it because it's not covered from a command and control server. It's being downloaded from somewhere trusted. The attackers then exploit the Microsoft Exchange proxy shell flaws and then use proxy logon, which are two well-known flaws in Exchange, to drop web shells on the server. The web shell then basically downloads that Microsoft logo from a nice, safe, trusted server somewhere, but it actually contains malware. The malware allows for file and directory actions, process management, registry manipulation, additional downloads, and exfiltration, so it's pretty nasty. And it's a very clever technique, so check that out if you're interested. Patch your Exchange servers. CISA released a guide this week to help you prepare for the 1st of November, because on the 1st of November, everyone subject to certain rules and regs will be required to move from TLP1 to TLP2. And you probably have seen TLP stuff if you didn't know what it was called. TLP stands for Traffic Light Protocol, and it's used to inform recipients that data that you're getting, like, say, in an email or a text, basically has been classified, and it has a code associated with it that you theoretically have been trained on if you're getting this kind of material. So you may have seen labels like TLP red. You probably haven't seen those unless you have a top secret clearance. TLP white, which is stuff that we get all the time. I get those all the time from CISA, which means you can disclose it and so forth. Like I got a notice yesterday that said TLP white, which was about this very thing. TLP 2.0 is changing some of the codes. They're doing away with the white category, and that's going to be changed to clear, which actually makes a lot more sense. And there's other changes to that guidance, though. The guidance goes into effect on the 1st of November, so it's worth reading up on the CISA report, which is a guide to what to expect and what to do, because if you are using this either to receive information or to send information with TLP coding, you don't want to screw up and take a whole bunch of classified documents into the bathroom with you, or maybe, say, leave them sitting around your country club or whatever. Sorry, that was an easy, cheap shot, but I couldn't resist. The Department of Defense and HackerOne announced that their Hack US 1 week bug bounty challenge, which ran from the 4th of July to the 11th of July, was over, and they had exhausted the entire pool of bounties during that, which is kind of scary, right? It's DOD. It was like, yeah, we spent the entire pool. They gave out $75,000 in direct bounties and $35,000 in bonuses to 267 players who participated, and 139 of those players were new. So they really attracted a large pool of people, and they found a lot of problems. So they're probably going to do this again next year, which they probably should. So if you're interested in such things, it would be a great place to get started on bug hunting. And finally, you know how when billionaires, I pick one, when billionaires tell you that something's probably good for you and it's not harmful, that it's probably, not that. And, I always wonder, when somebody's going, yes, these cigarettes are healthy and wholesome, and then I wonder how long it'll be before somebody goes, oh, no, they were lying. Well, Elon Musk, and I still don't have that Tesla X that you talked about, Elon. That night I met you when you were talking about the Tesla X and you'd send me one? Yeah, I still don't have that. And I don't even have that free ride into space we talked about. Call me, bruv. We need to talk. But anyway, Elon says he wants to release a machine that will replace humans. Tesla's version of this is called Optimus. No way this goes bad. I mean, no way. And Musk claimed that he might demonstrate Optimus at an AI event I think it's this Friday evening. Like, he's going to actually trot Optimus out of the closet and turn it loose. But now, does this sound like the lead into one of those International Universal films? It sure does to me, like just a harmless scientist trying to do his best for humanity suddenly releases Optimus on the general public. After 30 years of fighting, the human race was vanquished, leaving us in a dystopian nightmare. Yeah, I mean, no way this goes bad. But anyway, Musk announced that the 5'8" robot, which that's 172 centimeters to everybody else in the world, but he described the robot as it's intended to be friendly, of course, and would help with repetitive menial tasks. And that he went on to say that it was slow enough that if it was ever dangerous that he just immediately started hedging, like if it ever decided to attack and kill everybody in the room with a machete, you could just outrun it. I'm like, I don't like that. Like, put it in your house. You can always just run if it goes crazy. I mean, I guess you never heard of the Kalons. Well, anyway, call me, Elon. We need to talk. But that is the wrap up for the week of 25 September 2022. I'm Doug White. We'll see you next time.